The photograph on Anderson's phone had been taken from inside Edith's hospital corridor only moments earlier. It showed him sitting beside her bed, completely unaware that someone was watching through the narrow glass panel in the door. Beneath the image was a warning that made his blood run cold. Stop investigating, or Edith would die next. Anderson immediately looked towards the hospital room entrance. The corridor appeared quiet, but the photograph proved that someone had been standing there recently. Whoever sent the message knew Edith's exact room, understood the investigation, and had managed to approach the private ward despite the additional security. Even more disturbing was the possibility that the person had been close enough to hear their conversations. Edith noticed the sudden change in Anderson's expression. A moment earlier, they had been discussing the forged company document found inside her father's secret locker. Now Anderson was staring at his phone as though another disaster had arrived. Edith asked what he had received, but he locked the screen and told her not to worry. She immediately reminded him that promises of protection did not give him the right to hide the truth. Anderson hesitated. The doctors had warned him to protect Edith from further emotional pressure, but keeping the message secret might place her in even greater danger. He finally showed her the photograph without allowing her to hold the phone. Edith studied the image and then looked towards the door. Her fear was obvious, but she did not panic. Instead, she asked how someone had entered the private corridor without being stopped. Barrister Williams immediately called hospital security and ordered the floors sealed. Every lift, stairwell, and service exit was closed while officers reviewed the cameras. Anderson's personal guards moved into Edith's room and checked the windows, washroom, ceiling panels, and medical equipment. The doctors protested that too many people would disturb their patient, but Anderson refused to take another risk until the sender was identified. Edith watched the security team work around her and quietly placed a hand over her stomach. Their baby's heartbeat remained stable, but the child had already survived too many moments of fear. Edith told Anderson that she did not want their baby's first home to become a room filled with armed guards and suspicion. Anderson sat beside her and replied that he wanted peace too, but peace meant nothing if he ignored a direct threat. The photograph had been taken from an angle near the nurse's station. Barrister Williams compared the image with the corridor layout and concluded that the sender had stood behind a decorative divider positioned opposite Edith's room. The location was normally visible to staff, which meant the person either looked harmless enough to avoid attention or already belonged there. Hospital security reviewed the footage from the previous 30 minutes. Several doctors and nurses had passed through the corridor. Anderson's mother had left to recover the key from Edith's family home. Barrister Williams had moved between the private room and the family waiting area. 2 police officers had delivered evidence forms. A cleaner had replaced a waste bin. There was also one familiar visitor who had arrived carrying company documents. Sonia. For years, Sonia had worked as Anderson's executive assistant at Williams Holdings. She managed his schedule, protected confidential files, and often knew his movements before members of his own family did. In the early days of the story, she was the person who informed him about board meetings, contracts, and changes inside the company. She had always appeared loyal, disciplined, and almost invisible outside the office. According to the hospital cameras, Sonia arrived 11 minutes before Anderson received the threat. She told security that she needed his signature on urgent company documents. A guard refused to let her enter Edith's room, so she remained near the nurse's station for several minutes before leaving the folder with hospital reception. The footage showed her walking past the decorative divider, but the camera angle did not reveal whether she stopped behind it. Anderson stared at the screen without speaking. Sonia had worked beside him for more than a decade. She had access to his office, private schedule, and authorized company documents. If someone needed to copy his signature, understand internal payment systems, or know exactly when he would be away from Edith, Sonia had everything required. Barrister Williams warned him not to reach a conclusion too quickly. Sonia's presence was suspicious, but hundreds of people had entered the hospital that day. She might simply have delivered genuine documents during the same period the photograph was taken. Anderson agreed, yet one fact continued troubling him. Sonia had not called before arriving, even though she never brought papers to him without confirming his availability. Edith asked whether Sonia had worked at Williams Holdings when her father died. Anderson initially believed she had joined much later, but Barrister Williams checked the company archives and discovered something unexpected. Sonia had not always been Anderson's executive assistant. Years before receiving that position, she worked as a junior records and payments officer inside one of Williams Holdings' transport subsidiaries. That subsidiary controlled towing services, security vehicles, and emergency logistics. The same type of departments mentioned in Officer Johnson's investigation. Anderson felt a cold pressure form inside his chest. Sonia had entered his company shortly before Edith's father died. Her early role would have given her access to operational accounts, vehicle records, and payment authorizations. She might not have possessed enough power to create the entire cover-up alone, but she could have processed the payment that carried Anderson's forged signature. Barrister Williams instructed his legal team to preserve Sonia's employment files and block any attempt to remove documents from the company system. He also warned Anderson not to contact her yet. If she was involved, a direct accusation might cause her to destroy evidence or disappear. They needed to determine whether the threatening message actually came from her device. Hospital technicians traced the message to a disposable phone connected briefly to the guest Wi-Fi. The device had been switched off immediately after sending the photograph. Security later found a cheap mobile phone hidden inside a waste bin near the public washrooms. It contained no fingerprints that could be used immediately because its surface had been wiped, but a technician discovered that the camera had been used only once. The deleted photograph matched the image Anderson received. The phone had connected to the hospital network at almost the exact moment Sonia entered the building. Anderson wanted to call her, but Barrister Williams suggested a different approach. They would behave as though the threat had frightened Anderson into stopping the investigation. If Sonia believed the warning had worked, she might relax and make another mistake. Anderson would ask her to return to the hospital to discuss the documents, while the police quietly observed her. Edith did not like the idea of using her hospital room as part of a trap. Anderson assured her that Sonia would never come near the bed. The meeting would happen inside the private family lounge under police supervision. Edith argued that she deserved to know what was happening because the threat had been made against her. After a brief disagreement, they reached a compromise. Edith would remain in the room with Anderson's mother and 2 guards, while Anderson met Sonia nearby. Before calling, Anderson examined the folder Sonia left at reception. It contained routine contracts that did not require urgent attention. None of them needed his signature that day. One document had already been digitally approved the previous week. The unnecessary visit made her explanation even weaker. Anderson called Sonia and kept his voice calm. He told her he had received the documents but needed clarification on one of the transport accounts. Sonia apologized for arriving without notice and explained that the board had been requesting updates. Anderson asked whether she could return to the hospital. After a short pause, Sonia agreed. Her calmness disturbed him more than panic would have. While they waited, Anderson's mother returned with news from Edith's father's locker. The forged payment had been approved through a Williams Holdings operational account, and Officer Johnson's restored recording clearly stated that someone trusted by Anderson was using his name. When Anderson mentioned Sonia's old position, his mother became visibly uncomfortable. Anderson noticed immediately. He asked whether she knew something about Sonia's early years at the company. His mother avoided his eyes and said Sonia had been recommended by someone connected to Annabelle's family. Anderson demanded the name, but she hesitated long enough for him to understand that the truth was serious. Years earlier, Annabelle's father had maintained business relationships with several companies, including Williams Holdings. He helped arrange permits, land access, and political introductions during a difficult expansion period. In return, he occasionally recommended employees from families he trusted. Sonia was one of those recommendations. Anderson asked why nobody had ever told him. His mother explained that Sonia appeared hardworking and loyal. Over time, she became one of the most reliable people in the company. There had never been a reason to investigate the connection, especially after Annabelle's father reduced his public involvement in business. Barrister Williams asked whether Sonia and Annabelle were personally close. Anderson's mother said they were not friends, but Sonia had often helped Annabelle enter Anderson's office without appointments during the engagement. She also handled travel arrangements, private dinners, and gifts between them. At the time, it appeared to be ordinary administrative work. Edith listened quietly from the bed. She remembered several moments when Annabelle seemed to know exactly where Anderson would be. She knew about private meals, meetings, and the charity gala. Everyone assumed she received the information because she was Anderson's fiancée, but Sonia had controlled almost every detail of his schedule. Anderson's mother also remembered that Sonia was the first staff member to report Anderson's previous driver's resignation. That resignation led the chauffeur agency to send Edith. For one disturbing moment, Anderson wondered whether Edith's arrival had also been planned. The thought made no sense because Sonia could not have known the agency would choose Edith. Still, the number of coincidences surrounding his assistant had become impossible to ignore. Barrister Williams advised everyone not to expand suspicion beyond the evidence. The current facts connected Sonia to the company account, Annabelle's family, and the hospital corridor. Whether she controlled every event or simply helped hide an old crime remained unknown. Sonia arrived 30 minutes later, wearing a modest gray business dress and carrying her usual leather folder. She appeared concerned when she saw police officers near the private ward. She asked Anderson whether Edith and the baby were safe. Anderson replied that they were recovering and invited her into the family lounge. A hidden camera recorded the meeting while two officers watched from the next room. Barrister Williams sat beside Anderson, pretending to review company files. Sonia remained composed and asked which transport account needed clarification. Anderson placed a copy of the forged payment on the table. Sonia's expression did not change immediately, but her fingers tightened around the edge of her folder. Anderson asked whether she recognized the document. Sonia examined it and said it appeared to be an old payment authorization. She pointed out that the company had changed accounting systems several times and suggested sending it to the archives department. Anderson told her the payment had been connected to the removal of a damaged car on the night Officer Johnson died. He watched her eyes carefully. Sonia looked towards Barrister Williams and asked why a private company document was now part of a police investigation. The lawyer replied that the signature had been forged. He asked who possessed access to Anderson's authorized payment templates during that period. Sonia said she had been a junior officer and could not remember every employee from so many years ago. Anderson reminded her that she personally processed emergency transport payments. Sonia replied that hundreds of transactions passed through her desk. She could not be expected to remember one towing invoice after more than a decade. Barrister Williams then placed a photograph of the hospital corridor beside the payment. Sonia looked at the image and asked why it had been shown to her. Anderson revealed that the photograph had been sent with a threat against Edith only minutes after Sonia entered the hospital. For the first time, Sonia's control weakened. She accused Anderson of believing she had threatened his fiancée. Anderson did not answer directly. He asked why she visited with documents that required no urgent signature. Sonia claimed a board member asked her to deliver them, but when Anderson requested the person's name, she hesitated. The officers watching from the next room prepared to enter, yet Barrister Williams signaled them to wait. A lie was not enough for arrest. They needed Sonia to reveal something that connected her more clearly to the evidence. Anderson leaned back and told Sonia that he had decided to stop investigating Edith's father's death. He said the threat had reminded him that protecting Edith mattered more than uncovering an old crime. Sonia studied him as if deciding whether to believe the statement. She finally said he was making the correct choice. According to her, digging into the past would only reopen pain and damage the Williams name. She advised him to focus on Edith, the baby, and rebuilding public trust after Annabelle's accusations. Anderson asked why the investigation would damage his family if his signature had been forged. Sonia realized her mistake immediately. She tried to explain that even false accusations could harm a company's reputation, but Anderson had heard enough. She knew more about the forged document than he had revealed publicly. Barrister Williams asked Sonia to hand over her phone. She refused and stood from the chair. The officers entered before she could reach the door. Sonia remained calm and said nobody had the authority to search her personal device without a warrant. The lead officer replied that she was not under arrest, but the hospital threat and evidence tampering investigation gave them reason to detain her for questioning. Sonia looked towards Anderson with a hurt expression. She asked whether years of loyalty meant nothing to him. Anderson said loyalty built on secrets was not loyalty. As an officer moved closer, Sonia reached inside her folder. The room tensed, but she removed only a small flash drive. She placed it on the table and said that if Anderson truly wanted the past, he should understand that the story did not begin with her. Barrister Williams asked what the drive contained. Sonia said it held copies of old company records, private correspondence, and voice messages connected to Officer Johnson's investigation. She had protected the files for years because they were the only insurance she possessed against the people who controlled her. Anderson asked why she sent the threat to Edith. Sonia denied sending it. She admitted visiting the hospital and standing near the divider, but claimed she had noticed someone else watching the room. According to her, she followed the person towards the washroom but lost sight of them. She returned to reception, left the documents, and went back to the office. The police asked for a description. Sonia said the figure wore a hospital uniform and kept their face turned away. That answer sounded almost identical to the disguise Annabelle had previously used, but Annabelle was already under police guard at another hospital when the latest photograph was taken. Barrister Williams warned Sonia that lying would make her situation worse. Sonia insisted she was telling the truth. She said the real person behind the cover-up had always preferred allowing other people to appear guilty. Annabelle believed her family controlled the secret. The laboratory supervisor believed Annabelle controlled him. Sonia herself believed she understood the old payment network. In reality, everyone had been used. Anderson asked who had used them. Sonia looked towards the hidden camera as though she knew the police were watching. Then she said the person had access to Williams' holdings before Anderson took full control. That person understood his signature, company accounts, and family routines. They also possessed enough influence to remove Officer Johnson from the accident scene and change the official report. Anderson demanded a name. Sonia refused to speak until she received written protection. She claimed that if she said the name inside the hospital, Edith would not survive the night. Anderson's anger exploded. He accused her of making another threat, but Sonia said she was warning him, not threatening him. The lead officer took possession of the flash drive and escorted Sonia from the room for questioning. Before leaving, she looked at Anderson and told him to examine the date on the oldest file. She said he would discover that someone had been protecting the Williams name long before she joined the company. Anderson immediately gave the flash drive to the police technician. The device contained hundreds of encrypted documents, but one folder was not protected. Its title was simply Johnson. Inside were scanned copies of the forged towing payment, photographs of Annabelle's damaged car, and records from a private clinic. One medical page confirmed that Officer Johnson arrived alive. His injuries were serious but treatable if emergency surgery had begun immediately. Instead, the clinic delayed treatment for nearly 2 hours. A handwritten note instructed the staff not to register the patient under his real name and not to contact the police. By the time the order changed, Officer Johnson had died. Edith read the report from her hospital bed and began crying. Her father might have survived. He had not died because the accident was impossible to treat. He died because powerful people value their reputations more than his life. Anderson held her carefully as she wept. He did not tell her to remain strong. He did not ask her to stop crying for the sake of the baby. He simply allowed her to grieve the truth she had been denied for years. Edith's mother arrived shortly afterwards. The doctor had initially resisted allowing another emotional conversation, but Edith refused to let her mother hear the truth from strangers. When she explained that her father reached a clinic alive, her mother's face collapsed. For years, the woman had blamed herself for not searching every hospital in Lagos. Police officers told her that her husband died on the road, so she accepted their report. Now she learned he had been taken somewhere, hidden under a false name, and denied the treatment that could have saved him. Edith's mother asked who gave the order. Nobody had an answer yet. The handwritten note contained only initials M.W. Anderson immediately thought of his mother. Her name did not begin with those letters, but someone from his extended family might fit them. Barrister Williams searched former Williams Holdings directors, senior employees, and relatives connected to the company during that year. Only one familiar name appeared repeatedly in the records: Margaret Williams. Aunt Margaret. She had been one of the few people who recognized Anderson's feelings for Edith before he admitted them. She had welcomed Edith, encouraged Anderson to stop lying to himself, and treated the driver with kindness. During the early days of their relationship, Margaret appeared to support them more openly than almost anyone else. Years earlier, however, she had served as head of corporate affairs for Williams Holdings. She managed crises, protected the company's public image, and maintained relationships with private clinics, towing companies, and government offices. She also possessed authority to approve emergency payments when Anderson was traveling. The initials on the medical instruction matched her name. Anderson refused to believe it. Aunt Margaret had been part of his life since childhood. After his father's death, she helped his mother handle family responsibilities and supported Anderson during the company's most difficult years. She had never given him a reason to question her loyalty. Barrister Williams reminded him that Officer Johnson's recording described someone he trusted completely. Sonia had also warned him that the person possessed access before Anderson took full control. Margaret fit every detail. Edith did not accuse her. She asked Anderson to verify the evidence before making a decision. Annabelle's lies had already taught them how dangerous it was to build conclusions around incomplete information. The initials might belong to someone else, and the files could have been arranged to create another false suspect. Anderson appreciated her fairness, but he could not ignore the connection. He called Aunt Margaret and asked where she was. Margaret answered warmly and said she had been praying for Edith. Anderson told her that he needed to see her at the hospital. Margaret became quiet. She asked whether they had opened Officer Johnson's locker. Anderson felt the final piece of trust break inside him. He had not told her about the locker. He asked how she knew. Margaret ended the call. Police were immediately sent to her home, but security cameras showed that she had left less than an hour earlier. Her driver was still there and claimed Margaret told him she wanted to travel alone. One of her private vehicles was missing. Anderson's mother sat in stunned silence when she heard the news. Margaret was not only Anderson's aunt, she was her closest friend within the family. They had raised children together, protected one another through funerals, business conflicts, and years of loneliness. The possibility that Margaret had hidden Officer Johnson's death felt like a betrayal of their entire history. The police technician continued examining Sonia's flash drive and recovered an old voice recording between Sonia and Margaret. Sonia sounded young and frightened. She told Margaret that the damaged car belonged to Annabelle's family and that a police officer had been taken to the clinic alive. Margaret ordered her to process the towing payment through an emergency Williams Holdings account. Sonia asked whose signature she should use. Margaret replied, "Use Anderson's. Nobody will question it." The room became silent as the recording continued. Sonia warned that Anderson might discover the payment. Margaret said he was abroad negotiating an important contract and would never see a small transport expense. She promised to remove the record once the problem disappeared. Anderson listened to the woman he had trusted describe the use of his name as though it meant nothing. His anger was mixed with something deeper than rage. Margaret had not only helped hide a death, she had placed the crime inside his company and allowed Officer Johnson's family to live without justice. The recording ended before revealing why she protected Annabelle. Barrister Williams believed the answer involved Annabelle's father and an old agreement between their families. Perhaps Margaret feared a scandal would destroy a business deal. Perhaps she owed Annabelle's family money or protection. Whatever the reason, she had chosen the cover-up. Anderson ordered the police to find her before she could leave Lagos. Airports and private terminals were alerted, but Margaret's passport remained at home. That suggested she was not attempting to leave the country. Edith suddenly remembered something Margaret once said during an early visit. She had looked at Edith for a long moment before telling Anderson that some people entered a person's life for a reason. At the time, the comment sounded supportive. Now Edith wondered whether Margaret recognized Officer Johnson's daughter from the beginning. The chauffeur agency application included Edith's full name, family details, and her late father's occupation. Margaret had access to Anderson's staff files through Sonia. She might have known exactly who Edith was days after she entered the company. That raised another frightening question. If Margaret knew Edith was Officer Johnson's daughter, why had she encouraged Anderson's feelings instead of removing her? Barrister Williams suggested that Margaret might have been motivated by guilt. Perhaps she saw Edith's kindness and believed supporting her would repay part of the harm. Anderson rejected that explanation. Secretly helping Edith could never replace admitting the truth about her father. Edith remained uncertain. Margaret's kindness had always appeared genuine. A person could commit a terrible act and still feel regret later. But regret without confession had allowed the guilty to remain safe while her family suffered. The doctor entered and insisted Edith needed rest. Her blood pressure was rising again, although the baby remained stable. Anderson's mother promised to stay while Anderson spoke with the police. Edith asked him not to confront Margaret alone if she contacted him. Anderson promised he would involve the authorities. The promise lasted less than 20 minutes. Anderson received a call from Margaret's number. She told him not to trace it because the phone would be destroyed after the conversation. Anderson demanded that she surrender. Margaret replied that she was not running from the police. She was trying to reach the only evidence that could prove why she made her decisions. She admitted processing the towing payment and sending Officer Johnson to the private clinic. However, she denied ordering anyone to delay his treatment. According to Margaret, she believed the clinic would save him quietly before transferring him to a public hospital. When she later learned he had died, Annabelle's father claimed the injuries were already fatal. Anderson accused her of believing a convenient lie. Margaret accepted that she had been a coward. She said she chose the Williams company's future, Annabelle's family agreement, and her own reputation over the truth. She had lived with that decision every day. Anderson asked why she used his signature. Margaret replied that Anderson's name carried more authority than hers. The towing company and clinic obeyed immediately because they believed the order came directly from him. She planned to remove the payment record, but Officer Johnson had already copied several documents before his death. Anderson wanted to know why she supported Edith after recognizing her. Margaret admitted that when Edith became Anderson's driver, she saw Officer Johnson's face in her immediately. She could have arranged for Edith to lose the position, but she could not destroy the man's daughter after helping destroy his life. Encouraging Anderson's love was not part of a plan. She genuinely believed Edith had brought peace into his life. Her explanation only increased Anderson's anger. Margaret had watched him fall in love with Edith while knowing the truth beneath their families. She attended their happiest moments, offered advice, and behaved like a protector while hiding the crime that shaped Edith's entire life. Margaret said she wanted to confess many times, but Annabelle's father continued threatening to expose Anderson as the person who approved the cover-up. The forged document was convincing, and Margaret feared Anderson would lose his company and freedom. She convinced herself that silence was protecting him. Anderson told her she had never protected him. She had only protected the lie. Margaret then revealed that Annabelle's father was not the highest person involved. Officer Johnson's evidence reached beyond one family and one accident. The old system protected several wealthy people, and some of them still held powerful positions. If Margaret surrendered without securing the remaining evidence, those people would destroy every record and target Edith. Anderson asked where she was going. Margaret said Officer Johnson had made more than one copy of his investigation. The locker contained what he wanted the police to find, but another file had been hidden inside an abandoned Williams Holdings transport warehouse. Margaret had learned about it years earlier, but never possessed the courage to retrieve it. She was heading there now. Anderson told her to wait for the police. Margaret refused. She believed someone inside law enforcement had helped change Officer Johnson's original report. If the wrong officers reached the warehouse first, the evidence would disappear. Before ending the call, Margaret warned Anderson not to trust the person currently controlling the official investigation. The line went dead. Anderson immediately informed Barrister Williams and the lead police officer. The officer denied any connection to the old cover-up and demanded Margaret's location. Anderson only knew she mentioned an abandoned transport warehouse. Williams Holdings had owned several such properties over the years. Sonia, still under questioning, identified the likely location. One warehouse had been closed after a fire damaged its records section shortly after Officer Johnson died. The official cause was an electrical fault, but Sonia had always suspected the fire was deliberate. The property stood outside Lagos near an unused industrial road. Police vehicles prepared to move towards the warehouse. Anderson wanted to go, but Barrister Williams reminded him of his promise to Edith. Anderson argued that Margaret would not reveal the evidence to officers she did not trust. The lawyer replied that following her into an abandoned building could place him directly inside a trap. Edith heard the argument from her room. She asked Anderson to come inside and told him she understood why he wanted to go. Margaret's confession could finally expose everyone involved in her father's death. However, Edith refused to let Anderson behave as though his life belonged only to him. He was her fiancé and the father of their child. If he left, he had to go with police protection and remain outside until the building was secured. Anderson agreed. Before leaving, he kissed Edith and placed his hand over her stomach. He promised both of them that he would return. Edith looked into his eyes and reminded him that no truth was worth losing another person she loved. As Anderson traveled with Barrister Williams and several officers, Margaret reached the abandoned warehouse alone. The large metal doors were partly open, although she remembered locking them years earlier. She stepped inside holding a torch and an old key. Dust covered the floor, but fresh tire marks crossed the entrance. Someone had arrived before her. Margaret moved carefully through rows of damaged shelves and burned filing cabinets. At the back of the warehouse, she found the hidden compartment Officer Johnson had described in one of his notes. The lock had already been broken. The compartment was empty. Margaret heard movement behind her and turned. A figure stood in the darkness holding a gun. The person asked whether she truly believed she could expose secrets that powerful people had protected for years. Margaret recognized the voice and whispered person's name, but before she could say anything more, a gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Anderson's convoy was still several minutes away when Barrister Williams received an emergency call. A security alarm connected to warehouse had been activated, followed by the sound of a gunshot. When police finally entered the building, they found Margaret lying beside the empty compartment with blood spreading across her clothes. She was still alive, but barely conscious. Anderson ran towards her despite the officer's warnings. Margaret opened her eyes and tried to speak. He asked who shot her and where the evidence had gone. She pressed something small into his hand. It was a memory card. Margaret whispered that she had copied the final file years earlier because she never trusted the people involved. She told Anderson that Officer Johnson had discovered the identity of the person controlling the entire protection network. Anderson asked for the name. Margaret struggled to breathe. Before losing consciousness, she managed to whisper 4 words. "It was your father, Anderson." The paramedics rushed her away as Anderson stood frozen in the burned warehouse. His father had been dead for years. Anderson had built his life believing the man was strict but honorable, a businessman who taught him that a family name meant responsibility. Now Margaret was claiming that the entire system of forged payments, hidden accidents, and silenced witnesses had been controlled by him. Anderson looked down at the memory card in his hand. If Margaret was telling the truth, the enemy behind Officer Johnson's death was no longer someone standing beside Anderson. It was the man whose legacy Anderson had spent his entire life protecting. And somewhere inside the warehouse, the shooter who stole Officer Johnson's remaining evidence was still close enough to know that Margaret had survived. Subscribe now for the next part. And turn on notifications so don't miss the next chapter, which will be uploaded soon.